In the early morning hours of September 17, 1992, a knife-wielding, crazed 26-year-old Joel Rene Valdez broke into Xan Wilson's home and brutally raped and terrorized her for hours. Realizing she was not in a position to prevent this man from raping or even killing her, she had the remarkable presence of mind to insist on the use of a condom to protect herself against AIDS. Valdez put on a condom and proceeded to forcibly engage in multiple sexual acts. Valdez was arrested and initially charged with only burglary, but not rape. The jury apparently determined the use of a condom constituted a legal consent to the sexual acts that followed, and the public was shocked and outraged. Xan was infuriated by the grand jury's decision and called the Rape Crisis Center of Austin for help. They referred her to one of Austin's finest trial lawyers, Mark Mueller, who requested a second grand jury with appropriate psychological testimony to support Xan's position that insisting on a condom did not mean she consented to the rape. The second grand jury then voted to charge Valdez with both rape and burglary. On May 13, 1993, Joel Rene Valdez was convicted of aggravated sexual assault and sentenced to 40 years in prison. His projected release date is not until September 30th, 2032. Valdez is currently 54 years old. Even though the crime of rape has ancient roots, this case has particularly modern aspects. The specter of AIDS arises even in circumstances of extreme stress and panic. Women always run the risk of pregnancy or infection after rape, but now they worry about death too. Xan Wilson was not only wise to bargain for protection, but assertive even as she was being assaulted. The consent defense, which might have been accepted with a shrug years ago, was rejected outright by a public increasingly impatient with even more plausible defendants who invoke it. Here's Xan Wilson to share her nightmare from hell and how it's changed her.
My name is Xan Wilson. In the past, I've been referred to as the condom rape victim. I'm not a victim, I'm a survivor. I'm a survivor of rape, which is a violent crime. A lot of people have the conception that condoms are consent. It's not, and I'm here to tell you why. Protecting oneself from disease or death later because of what has occurred is not justification for consent. It's just protecting oneself, and you shouldn't be punished for protecting yourself. Being raped has changed my life in a number of ways. In the early years, there was an entire period of self-loathing, depression, self-destructive behaviors, suicide attempts. The way it has changed my life today has given me the power beyond what I had 27 years ago to be the voice for the victims that are not here, the ones that didn't survive. This life sentence includes PTSD, triggers. It's 27 years later and I'm sitting here crying. It still hurts. The actual rape itself is painful to think about, even all these years later. I don't know what's easier, not having to live through this or living through this. That is my life sentence.
In this Insider exclusive network TV special, Justice in America, Condoms Do Not Equal Consent, Xan Wilson's story. We visit with Mark Mueller, founder of Mueller Law Offices, his client Xan Wilson, Dayna Blazey, the Travis County, Texas prosecutor in the Joel Rene Valdez case, and Jennifer Hill, a sexual assault victim counselor at the Travis County, Texas DA's office. As we take you inside today's legal system and how this case changed the manner in which sexual assault cases were presented to grand juries in Travis County and several other jurisdictions. After this case, a qualified mental health care worker was routinely routinely made available to explain rape trauma, sexual assault behavior, and the range of victim responses, as well as to answer any questions that might arise. Because of the publicity around the case, it was an early educational wave of the Me Too movement, prompting conversations all over the world. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from Austin, Texas. It is my great pleasure to introduce Mark Mueller to the show. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Steve, I'm honored to be here.
Tell our audience a little bit about the type of law your law firm practices.
Well, it depends on what year it is and what case it is. But generally, I work on cases in which somebody's been hurt or something has gone terribly wrong and their life's affected. I did criminal cases when I was a very young lawyer, even court-appointed criminal cases. So I've done a wide variety.
Okay. Why did you decide to be a plaintiff lawyer, represent the little guy?
I always wanted to be that guy that was going against the Goliath. I always wanted to be that guy. In fact, I was told once by a psychiatrist that I had a delusion of grandeur, because I believed that you could win against impossible odds.
Today we are here talking about a very infamous case that took place a number of years ago, and your client was Xan Wilson. This case was both a criminal and a civil case. So what I'd like to do now is bring on the prosecutor who prosecuted Xan Wilson's rapist. Her name is Dayna Blazey, so let's bring her on right now. It is my great pleasure to introduce Dayna Blazey to the show. Welcome to the show, Dayna.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You were the prosecutor on this case. Tell our audience, both of you, tell our audience a little bit about what this case was about and why it was so important.
This case was so important because it really focused on a lack of consent. Under Texas law, the prosecutor has the burden of showing that a sexual assault occurred without the effective consent of the victim. The defense in this case tried to focus that issue and negate that issue on the fact that the survivor asked him to wear a condom.
In other words, somebody broke into her house.
Yes.
He had a knife.
Yes.
He was about to rape her. He did rape her, okay? And she had the wherewithal, the stability of mind to say, you know, if you're going to rape me, put a condom on, because there's a thing called AIDS and I don't want to die, right?
Absolutely.
And the defense was using that to their advantage, saying, well, I was actually consent, right?
Correct.
Now, in the history of when the case was first considered, a rape charge was not leveled against the defendant, correct?
That is correct. Another prosecutor had the case before me, presented the case to a grand jury, which all felony cases in Texas must be presented to a grand jury to convey jurisdiction on a court. And the grand jury declined to indict.
Because?
Follow-up charges on that issue of consent, because she asked for him to wear a condom. And so the grand jury returned a no bill, which is basically, that was the end of the case. The charges were dismissed.
Yeah, so what happened, my first interaction with the case was I got a call from the Rape Crisis Center where I did some volunteer work and I gave free legal advice to them, the staff, or whoever they needed over there. It's my service. And I got a call from them saying, can you talk to this lady who has been assaulted? There was a problem with the grand jury. And the man wasn't charged with rape, even though he broke into the place and was charged with burglary. So I said, sure, I'll talk to her. So she came over that day and explained the situation to me, and obviously she was still shook up. And now she's got a double shakeup. She's been assaulted, and the legal system has assaulted her second. And so I had familiarity with the district attorney's prerogative to have more than one grand jury. I'd written an article on that a long time ago. It just happened to have that happen. So I knew they could do this more than once. And so I talked to Xan and said, well, they can do another grand jury. This is crazy. This is just an aberrational thing. This can't possibly happen. So I called up the district attorney's office. I don't remember who I talked to. It wasn't her. but I said, explain the situation. I said, this is going to be really bad for Austin, for you, for everybody. It's going to be really a black eye, because it just, if the jury finds them not guilty after a trial, that's one thing. But when somebody breaks in with and has a knife, for God's sakes, you got to at least have a trial or a charge on this. So they told me it's not our policy to do more than one grand jury. I said, well, I understand it's not your policy, but do you want a riot on the courthouse, and do you want everyone to think that Austin is a hick town, that this is okay behavior? Because we don't want to condone this. They're supposed to be progressive. We're supposed to be caring. So, well, we'll ask. They said, we'll ask somebody up the chain. And they paused for a while, asked somebody up the chain, and said, well, I'm sorry, but we've decided to stick with our policy, and we're not going to do it. And I said, please, we can't let this go. It's not a situation where I'm bluffing you. I have to put this out there, and we're going to have a big stink, and it's going to be a big black eye for you guys, because I'm going to have to tell them I tried, and you didn't do it. And so I'm sorry.
And you were doing this not as a lawyer. You were doing this as a concerned citizen and a person who helps the Rape Center of Austin. This
is a civic duty volunteer situation because I had been exposed to a lot of people who had been sexually assaulted in my life. And I saw how bad it was, and how underreported it was, and how unfair it was. And so, so I was taking this on just as an advisor, as a helper. And I was outraged. It was crazy. I couldn't believe it. So what happened was we made a few phone calls. I made a few phone calls. Within a very short time, there was a demonstration on the courthouse square. There was on CNN Live. It was front page New York Times. And the next day, I was at the office, and a call came in. I still remember this. The guy still works for me. You'll meet him later. And he said, Mark, there's a call from you from the district attorney, not the assistant district attorney, the district attorney. I said, well, can you have him hold for just a second? Just a second. It was like, not too long, but sure. He put him through, and I said, sure, we'll meet with you. And yes, we'd love to come down and explain our side of this. And we'd like to bring a counselor too, to explain sort of how people react differently to situations where they've been assaulted. Thank you very much. And I went down, and that was pretty much what I did. Was I talked about rape and consent. They got that. They understood that. The problem was not the DA's office. The problem was the grand jury and whatever went on behind there. So we decided it might be a good idea to put a little extra time into it, to have a counselor talk about how people respond. Some people take showers. Some people pretend it didn't happen. Some people think it's their fault. Some people think they got themselves in situations. So it varies. Anyway, that changed the way things happened, and then turned it over to this one. Now, I started off my practice as a criminal defense lawyer, doing court-appointed criminal cases. I had never prosecuted a case. I was allergic to prosecution of cases. And this is the first time that I ever worked with a prosecutor to try to get justice done from that standpoint, at a trial level. Okay, justice, yes, try to get the right thing to happen. And so it was interesting to watch somebody really do their work.
Right. This took place in 1992.
Correct.
This case changed the mindset of almost every major city district attorney's office in the country, right? Because there are some rape victims who say to themselves, I know I'm going to be raped. I don't want to die as a result of a sexually transmitted disease, so I need to protect myself, correct?
Correct, absolutely.
And from this case on, a lot of those cases are prosecuted, right?
Yes.
Correct me if I'm wrong, the defense still used the defense that it was consent.
During the trial, that was their defense, that it must have been consensual because she asked him to wear a condom not once but twice. And Fortunately, we had a very, very educated, a very smart jury, and that they did not, we talked to the jury afterwards, and that defense did not play with any of them.
Right, right. What ended up happening in this case? How long was the jury out, by the way?
A few hours, yes. I would, considering the length of the testimony and the amount of evidence that was presented, it was not an excessive amount of time. Yeah. In fact, I think it was a pretty short period of time. And then they returned a verdict of guilty for aggravated sexual assault, which was what we were asking, and sentenced him to 40 years in prison.
And he's still in prison. What's his name again?
Joel Valdez.
Yeah, I saw that he's supposed to be released in 2037, and he's 54 years old right now.
Yes, the last time I looked at the prison website, he was still in prison.
Yeah. Did he ever appeal the case? Just kidding.
Yes, he did. He did. He appealed it.
On what grounds? Consent thing again?
Yes. There's several different grounds. I didn't handle the appeal. My trial partner handled the appeal, and yes, it went up to the Third Court of Appeals, and none of the grounds were valid grounds.
Yeah, well, the case changed the way the district attorney's office does.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Now, you also handled an additional case related to this, a civil case, a premises liability case, correct?
Yes, that's right.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Xan didn't really know what happened other than she woke up and there was a guy in there. And so we found out that he got in through a sliding glass door. So the case that we had was a negligent security case. It was a small place. This was not like a big apartment complex with lots of gates and things like that. It was like a fourplex or something like that.
Fourplex.
And it kind of had a cheap, shady lock there, you know, that one of those latches that could be, as the police officer wrote in his report, something like, it was easily defeated, was the language he used. And so, you know, but honestly, when you get into a situation like that, it's like, Xan, did you lock that or not? Well, I think I did. I almost always do. So that case was about whether or not the lock was good enough, because it was not a big enough place that you had to have guards or anything like that. So was the locking mechanism adequate for where it was? We said it wasn't, and I think it wasn't. So we were able to settle with them for their insurance limits after a couple of depositions and after the criminal trial. We didn't even start any of that.
Right, because you got the conviction to your end.
Yes. First things first.
You are the director and assistant district attorney. Yes. You're running for judge too, right?
Yes, I am.
But you're the director in the office.
I am one of the directors. I'm over a grand jury intake and our diversion dockets now.
And you brought with you today a Jennifer Hill, who is one of the sexual assault victim counselors, correct?
She works for the district attorney's office in our victim witness division, and she has a lot of experience with sexual assault survivors.
All right. Well, fortunately, she's here today.
Yes, she is.
We're going to bring her on so we can ask her a few questions.
Great.
It's my great pleasure to introduce Jennifer Hill to the show. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you.
You work with Dayna in the district attorney's office, correct?
Yes.
And you are officially a sexual assault victim counselor?
Yes.
What does your job entail?
So basically, I provide counseling and support services to victims of sexual assault while they're going through the criminal justice process.
Okay. This question is for both of you. What is considered, defined legally, sexual violence?
Well, the statute talks about sexual assault is any type of sexual penetration, some types of sexual contact under a new statute that is without the effective consent of the victim. And Texas statute is pretty specific on when it is without the effective consent of the victim.
Is it? How, like specifically how?
If there's force, there's threats, there's a weapon that's involved, if someone is incapable of giving consent because of the degree of their intoxication.
Or they're in a nursing home.
Or they're in a nursing home.
Authority figures, law enforcement, clergy.
Yes.
Let me ask you both this. You know, we are in an era right now which is called the Me Too generation, okay? And there are, you know, we're all human beings. There are people that make false claims, okay? There are people that make legitimate claims. How do you guys determine whether something is for real? What do you do? You bring them in, you question them, what do you do?
So where that starts, it starts with the investigation. Law enforcement is charged with conducting an investigation, and that the critical part of that is to make sure it is a thorough, detailed investigation, that they have interviewed all of the witnesses that may have information about what occurred, that cell phone records are now very prevalent and very common for use in criminal trials, showing the location of a particular cell phone. We also do DNA testing, any type of forensic testing, and so in terms of your question with a false allegation, it's just very important to have a very detailed, thorough investigation.
The police issue a report?
Yes.
Do you do your own investigation
Yes.
in addition to the police report? Because as in the case of Xan Wilson, she was trying to protect herself. And because she was trying to protect herself, at first the grand jury didn't believe her. They didn't want to bring an indictment for rape. Obviously, her case changed everything, right?
So as a prosecutor, what I do when I am looking at a file, when I'm getting a sexual assault case ready for trial, is I look at the investigation that law enforcement's done. And I look, is there something that's missing? Are there other witnesses? Are there other evidence? And I will ask law enforcement to go back and continue their investigation, acquiring this additional information. Then I meet with all of the witnesses face to face, sit down and talk with them. Typically, I've got their statements in front of me. And so, yes, I don't do a new investigation, but as part of trial prep, I am very thorough in the details that I'm going to have to present to a jury. So I have to be as familiar with the details and the information and the evidence that I'm going to be presenting as the original law enforcement officer was.
Right. You probably get a lot of cases where one side says, well, we were in bed together. The girl said, I didn't want to have sex. I didn't want to have intercourse. And the guy will say, well, that's not what she said. How do you differentiate whether those are rape cases or not?
Well, you have to go back to the statute, as I was talking about, because the Texas statute says it has to be without the effective consent. And so you look at the circumstances of what happened to determine whether it meets one of the elements of our statute. As a prosecutor, I'm bound by the Texas Penal Code and how it defines sexual assault or aggravated sexual assault.
Is there a statute where a victim has to report a rape within a certain period of time?
We have the statute of limitations, but there's nothing that states they have to report. Yeah, victims correct. Can make a non-report at the crisis center if they want to go get an exam without actually having to report to law enforcement, but there's no law saying that they have to report the crime.
As a counselor, what do you find the most common issues and problems that victims deal with?
There's a lot. Ultimately, as far as when it comes to, deciding whether or not to report, whether or not to talk about it, that's something that they have to make the decision. There's no right or wrong answer for that.
Do you find a lot of women or victims, do you find a lot of victims blame themselves?
That's definitely something that happens.
Do you spend your time trying to convince them that they shouldn't be blaming themselves?
It's not about convincing them. It's about working with them and helping them understand that the only person who's at fault is the person who committed the crime, and that there's nothing that they could have done differently to change that. They did exactly what they needed to do in that moment to survive.
That is one of the things that I believe this case illustrates, is that it's hard to judge someone's actions in a specific horrific, traumatic situation after the fact. And that people, women, men, whomever is being victimized, their mind goes into survival mode. And it is, what do I need to do to get out of this situation alive? And I think that if there is a takeaway from the condom rape case, I think that's it, is that you have to look at where this person was at that time and examine their actions in the sense of they're doing what they think they're going to be killed, and they're doing whatever they can do to get out of it alive.
We're fortunate today to have Xan Wilson with us, so we're going to bring her on right now so she can tell her story. It's my great pleasure to introduce Xan Wilson to the show. Welcome to the show, Xan.
Hi, thank you.
Thank you for coming here.
Thank you.
Your case goes back a while.
Yes, sir.
Can you tell our audience just real briefly what happened that night?
I went to a friend's birthday party and stayed to wash up, clean dishes, clean the kitchen. I got home after midnight, got undressed, went to bed, and my dog started barking. So I got up to see what she was barking at. It was a very unusual bark, and by doing so, I was able to turn on the lights in the bedroom, and at the door, I saw Valdez coming in, and he had a knife. I tried to shut the door, but couldn't.
His face was totally exposed and everything.
We were looking in each other's eyes at that point.
What was going through your mind? How big was this knife?
It was a steak knife.
Okay, what was going through your mind?
Wow, 1,000 thoughts a minute.
You thought you might die.
Yeah, welcome to the last day of your life.
Then what happened?
An assault ensued, but I was able to talk him into wearing a condom. I asked him about AIDS, and his response was, "I ain't got no AIDS." And I said, "Well, what if I do?" And his light bulb went off, and he put the first condom on. Rape ensues. He takes it off, throws it on the floor, and I get him to put a second one on. The rape itself lasted an hour or so. Time at that time stood still. I don't have a concept of exactly how long it took.
Where was the knife at this time?
Generally in his hand.
While he's raping you?
Yes, but I did get him relaxed enough to set it down on a nightstand that also had a pair of orange-handled sewing scissors. And I had my eye on that knife and those scissors the entire time, just waiting for that moment.
And then what happened after the rape?
The moment came where I had the opportunity to roll over, get the knife in one hand, get the scissors in the other. I'll bleep the expletives, but I basically told him, "You touch me again and I'll kill you." And at this point, we're face to face. His pants are down around his ankles, and I'm just standing there like this, ready, and I bolted. I ran out, ran to my neighbor's house, naked, pounded on their door, and they let me in, and that's where the 911 call.
They caught him. They arrested him soon thereafter, didn't they? The next day, was it?
Actually, we got a tip. We got a tip into law enforcement's tip line. It was someone that matched the description that Xan had given, and contact was made with him, and he was arrested.
When they arrested him, what happened next?
When they arrested him, he was charged, and a warrant was issued, and he was charged with aggravated sexual assault. In Texas, all felony cases have to be presented to a grand jury, so the next step in the process was for a prosecutor to prepare the case and present it to a grand jury, which is what happened.
And then what happened?
That grand jury returned a no bill, which a no bill is legal terminology for a dismissal of the charges. They refused to charge him with the sexual assault.
What were your feelings about that, Xan?
Sickening.
Yeah.
Like I'm being raped all over again.
Yeah. Now, you called, I think, the Rape Center of Austin. Is that right?
If I remember correctly, yes. It was a suggestion through Victim Services of the Austin Police Department.
And that found your way to Mark eventually.
Correct.
And Mark is the one that encouraged the prosecutor's office to take a second look, correct?
Correct.
Okay. In retrospect,
Yeah.
going by many years,
Yeah.
what suggestion do you have to women who are accosted by attackers like this? Because it seemed to me that you were very level-headed. It almost seems in your mind, you said, well, I guess I'm going to be raped. How can I protect myself?
Where my head was going was, you're going to die. Get a sample. Get a nicely packaged DNA sample. I used AIDS to get him to understand the importance of putting on the condom. So I had two. He pulled the first one off, and I'm like, perfect. Did talk him into wearing the second one, but in the heat of it, my mind was not really going to pregnancy and disease. It was going to, you're about to kill me. I don't know when in this process you're going to do it, but you're going to leave me a nicely packaged DNA sample because you are not getting away with this, no matter what.
Interesting. It's interesting.
Yeah.
That's smart, you know. One way or another, he was going to get caught.
I'm going to nail you.
What advice do you have to women out there to protect themselves?
It's tough because there's so many people, and I also want to specify that rape is not a gender-specific crime. People out there who have been affected by assault, report it. Do not give up. There are support systems in place that can help them be the voice that they cannot be or don't feel strong enough to be. There are systems in place to help them get through the process. You can't just let the perpetrator get away with it because it's not fair to the next person. Find the strength, find the support system, report it, follow through. It's a horrible process. It is a painful process, but it is no more painful than the assault itself. You got through that. Now let's get through this, because that's where they're going to find their empowerment. Being able to sit in a courtroom, point their attacker out, and say, that's who did it. And then have amazing people on a team to say, I believe you, and we're going to do what we can. That's where the empowerment comes from. I get asked that a lot. You know, where did you find the empowerment? Well, I don't know, other than you're not walking away from this. The only thing that is sad about the whole process is the perpetrator only gets a few years. It's a life sentence. There's no escape from it. It doesn't go away. I can't tell any victim out there or survivor out there that it's going to stop. It's not going to go away. It's a burden you have to carry for the rest of your life. It gets easier to process and put in your pocket and put on that nice face. And I can do it all day long, but this is the genuine face of PTSD. 27 years later. But I still have the empowerment knowing that I did what I had to do with Dayna and great support team to continue to survive this. Survival is a weird thing when it comes to a crime like this. Does it mean that you lived? Yeah, I guess. But not all victims of sexual assault that walk away from it truly survive. There's suicide. There's self-destructive means that may lead to their death due to the depression caused by it. And then there's just the living in fear and not feeling like a survivor. I'm pretty blessed.
Thank you very much for being on the show.
Thank you.
We're going to bring Mark back on because he handled the civil case for Xan Wilson. So let's bring him on right now. Thanks for being on here.
Thanks, Steve.
Tell our audience a little bit about the case that you represented. It was a civil case for Xan.
The civil case that I had was involving how the guy got into her apartment. And this was a small apartment, like a fourplex, I think it was. It was not a huge gated apartment, thing like that. But we determined that he got in through the sliding glass door. And so the whole focus of that case was the latch on the sliding glass door sufficiently secure, and had it been made more secure, would have prevented the entry.
Yeah. How do you prove a latch is sufficiently secure if it's already broken?
Well, yeah, right. That's hard, because the question was, and what was the lock like just before? And then who remembers whether they locked their lock that night or not? It was rough trying to remember everything. But essentially it was this sliding lock was just easy to beat. You could push it in, you could jimmy it. It was too easy to get in.
Did you have to show in court that these kind of locks are kind of flimsy?
Yeah, we actually took a couple of depositions, did some discovery on the case, and the language of the police report was very strong for us, because he said that the assaulter defeated the latch, and so that was defeated the latch.
It sounds Shakespearean to me, actually.
Yeah. Yeah. So the case actually was. Xan was such a strong witness and such a big personality at the time that between the police report and Xan, I think they didn't want to see what would happen at trial in that situation.
So they settled the case before it went to trial?
Yes.
So Mark was involved with your criminal case in the respect of making sure that the guy was indicted, perpetrator was indicted. He helped your civil case. What do you think about Mark's law firm?
It's my right-hand man.
He says the same thing about you.
I love this man to the moon and back. He was my support system when I really needed someone to help hold me up through some pretty tough times. And yeah, I'm kind of crazy about the guy.
You know, what I like about you, and even though this sounds, really helps the show, your psychology background,
yes,
your caring about individuals really demonstrates itself not only in this case, but in the other cases you've handled. You care. You want to make a difference.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of lawyers that they look at the bottom line, and oftentimes when you don't look at the bottom line, sometimes that bottom line ends up being bigger than what you had thought you might get out of a case, right?
Yeah, I was always told if you do the right thing for the right reason, it will work out more often than not. Yeah. And the friendships, the relationships are the best thing.
Mark's not a typical attorney.
No, he's not. One last question. This is for you. You have a lot of people that contact you, and they have cases, they have sad stories. How do you end up taking the ones that you do? And to better frame that question, how did you end up taking what made you decide to take Xan's case?
Yeah, in Xan's case, my first involvement was just as a helper in the community on behalf of the Rape Crisis Center to try to explain to her what had happened with the grand jury. And then I bonded with Xan, and I just wanted to see it through, and so that just happened. I was connected to the case. What can I say? I was the right guy for that job, and that's what happened. And sometimes that is what happens. I've turned down a lot of cases that are good cases, but they're for somebody else. I don't have that special connection to it. The case doesn't need me. Not that I'm like a special lawyer, but I have to do things that are important to me and that make a difference in people's lives.
Okay, well, I want to thank you both for being on the show.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.